If you were to drive across the United States in the spring of 2018, you would have witnessed a very specific, recurring architectural phenomenon. You'd pull into a sprawling suburban strip mall, navigate a massive, cracked asphalt parking lot, and look up to see the fading silhouette of a giant backward letter R.
Right, permanently scarred into the stucco facade of a massive big box building.
Exactly. 735 retail fortresses went dark almost simultaneously. Millions of square feet of commercial real estate were abruptly, emptied. The liquidation signs were taken down. The automatic doors were locked for the final time.
And an empire that had dictated the terms of global play for over half a century simply ceased to exist.
The physical remnants of those stores stand as monuments to a very specific type of corporate hubris. When we observe a collapse of that magnitude, the natural inclination is to look for a singular catastrophic event.
Right, like a massive accounting fraud or a sudden macroeconomic shock or even a devastating supply chain failure. We want a clean narrative.
We want to be able to point to a specific date on a chart and say, well, that was the fatal error. Welcome to this deep dive for Peak to Dust. For you, the listener joining us today, we are setting aside the usual commentary to conduct a clinical, forensic examination of retail history.
There will be no lighthearted nostalgia today. We are looking at the ruins of a juggernaut.
Today, we are investigating the ascent, the absolute peak, and the complete liquidation of the Toys R Us empire. Here is the mission for our deep dive today. First, we will conduct a detailed forensic examination of the company's ascent under its founder, Charles Lazarus.
Detailing precisely how they engineered their dominance to become the world's first true category killer.
Exactly. Then we will transition into a rigorous autopsy of its collapse. We'll specifically dissect the devastating 2005 leveraged buyout and the fatal strategic blunders that left this giant paralyzed.
Paralyzed and unable to pivot against modern apex predators in the retail space. The gravity of this particular corporate death requires a very rigorous analysis.
It does. We are examining the eradication of an entity that did not merely participate in a market, but actively define the parameters of an entire industry. To that end, our investigation today is built upon a mountain of specific corporate documents.
Yes, it is a meticulously documented tragedy.
We are utilizing historical market analyses, including highly detailed demographic and sales data from the NPD Group. We're examining legal filings from the Federal Trade Commission, internal corporate financial disclosures, and the definitive Boomerang Commerce pricing study from the final days of the company's existence.
What's fascinating here is that the overarching thesis emerging from these documents does not reveal a company that simply died of old age or shifting consumer preferences. I mean, those elements were present, but the failure was a slow, systematic suffocation.
A suffocation caused by what exactly?
It was caused by a lethal combination of engineered debt, profound management myopia, and a rapidly evolving digital marketplace that the executive leadership fundamentally misunderstood and, frankly, drastically underestimated.
So to understand the sheer scale of the fall, you first have to understand the unprecedented, staggering gravity of the ascent. We have to go back to the origins.
Which requires us to analyze the macroeconomic landscape of the American post-war boom.
Right. The genesis of Toys R Us dates back to 1948 in Washington, D.C. A young man named Charles Lazarus, newly returned from World War II, recognized a demographic certainty unfolding around him.
His fellow returning veterans were utilizing the GI Bill. They were getting married, moving out of urban centers into the rapidly expanding suburbs, and they were having children at an unprecedented rate.
The American dream was expanding, and it required infrastructure.
Lazarus identified a macroeconomic tidal wave before sociologists even officially coined the term baby boom. He understood that this generation of parents possessed a powerful psychological drive to provide their children with the material abundance that they themselves had been denied during the Depression and the war.
That psychological drive represented a massive, untapped consumer market. So Lazarus started with a remarkably small capital injection. He had just $5,000 in seed money.
Just $5,000?
Yeah, a combination of his own personal savings and a modest bank loan. He opened a store in the lower level of his father's bicycle repair shop, but he deliberately chose not to sell bicycles.
Right, he called his venture Children's Bargain Town. And his initial inventory consisted entirely of baby furniture, cribs, carriages, strollers, and high chairs for these returning veterans.
But looking at the early operational data of Children's Bargain Town reveals the first instance of his strategic brilliance. He was running a profitable business, but he quickly realized a fundamental flaw in the foundational economics of the furniture retail model.
Because furniture is a durable good, by its very definition, it is a one-time purchase. A family buys a solid oak crib for their first child, and they reuse that exact same crib for their second and third children.
Exactly. They do not return to Children's Bargain Town on a weekly or monthly basis to purchase more cribs. The customer acquisition cost was high, but the lifetime value of that customer was severely limited.
But the records show that those customers, while in the store purchasing a stroller, constantly asked Lazarus if he also sold toys.
And that constant consumer inquiry prompted a monumental strategic pivot.
He realized that toys, unlike solid wood cribs, possessed a built-in obsolescence. Toys broke, they were lost, they fell out of fashion.
Most importantly, children grew out of them rapidly.
Yeah.
The developmental stages of a child meant that a rattle was useless after a few months, necessitating the purchase of blocks.
Which were then replaced by tricycles, which were then replaced by board games. Toys guaranteed repeat business. They transformed a one-time furniture buyer into a recurring revenue stream that could last for over a decade.
So he began adding small toys, rattles, and stuffed animals to his inventory. And as the sales data proved these items to be immensely lucrative, the entire focus of the business shifted.
That shift culminated in a massive rebranding and operational overhaul in 1957. This is the birth of the toy supermarket.
Lazarus changed the name of his expanding business to Toys R Us.
Yeah.
He utilized the backward R in the logo to mimic childlike scrawl.
Which was a branding decision that would eventually become globally ubiquitous. But the branding is secondary to the operational model he adopted. He implemented a model that was entirely foreign to the toy industry at the time.
A grocery supermarket model.
Yes, it was a brutalist, highly utilitarian approach to retail that prioritized volume and efficiency over aesthetics. Self-service aisles, cash-and-carry checkout lanes, bare concrete or tile floors.
Okay, let's unpack this for a moment. Why was the grocery supermarket model so revolutionary for toys specifically in 1957? What was the established paradigm that Lazarus was disrupting?
To appreciate the magnitude of the disruption, you have to analyze the incumbent power structure of mid-century retail. In the 1950s, the retail toy market was utterly dominated by traditional multi-level department stores. Think of Macy's or Gimbel's.
Right. And the crucial factor is that these department stores viewed toys not as a primary year-round revenue driver, but as a seasonal necessity.
Exactly. The historical data shows that traditional department stores executed a staggering 70% of their annual toy business in the highly concentrated 6 weeks immediately preceding Christmas.
70% in just 6 weeks.
It's incredible. For the rest of the year, the toy department was an afterthought. The footprint was small, the inventory was extremely limited, and the presentation was highly curated. Toys were often kept behind glass display cases.
Requiring a customer to interact with a hovering commissioned salesperson just to inspect an item. It was a formal, heavily mediated transaction. The consumer was kept at a distance from the merchandise.
It was formal, expensive due to the overhead of the sales staff, and entirely dictated by the calendar. Lazarus recognized the inefficiency of this model and forced a massive paradigm shift.
His thesis was that parents needed to buy toys year-round for birthdays, for rewards, behavioral incentives. He stripped away the glass cases and moved the product out into massive 45,000 square foot warehouse formats.
He eliminated the commissioned salespeople, replacing them with shopping carts and open shelving. He recognized a profound psychological trigger. The sheer volume of product, stacked literally from the floor to the ceiling, created a visual abundance.
An abundance that was deeply intoxicating to a post-war consumer base that still remembered the empty shelves of wartime rationing. It was the architecture of infinite choice.
But before this warehouse model could achieve total market saturation, the corporate history shows a significant period of structural turbulence. Between 1966 and 1978, the company weathered its first major existential threat.
Right. In 1966, Lazarus had successfully grown the operation to 4 massive stores, generating approximately $12 million in annual sales.
Yeah.
However, to finance the aggressive nationwide expansion he envisioned, he required a massive capital injection.
So he sold the company to Interstate Stores for $7.5 million in cash. Though a crucial stipulation of the contract was that Lazarus remained the head of the toy division.
Interstate Stores was a sprawling conglomerate of traditional department and discount stores. Analytically speaking, they were a prime example of ill-managed, undisciplined corporate growth.
They lacked a cohesive central strategy. By 1974, Interstate's poorly executed ventures into various other discount retail sectors hemorrhaged cash, driving the entire parent company into a catastrophic bankruptcy.
The financial filings from that bankruptcy are fascinating because they reveal a stark dichotomy within the conglomerate. While the parent company was collapsing, the Toys R Us division was highly profitable.
It accounted for a massive 85% of Interstate's total sales.
85%. So Lazarus, demonstrating an immense degree of corporate agility and ruthlessness, convinced the bankruptcy court to allow him to personally oversee Interstate during the restructuring process.
He systematically and ruthlessly liquidated every single unprofitable non-toy operation within the conglomerate. He severed the dead weight, took back total operational control, and brought the newly streamlined company public in 1978.
Emerging from the ashes of the Interstate bankruptcy, Toys R Us was no longer just a successful regional chain constrained by a lack of capital.
The 1978 initial public offering injected the massive liquidity required for Lazarus to engineer a truly national retail juggernaut. He was not just expanding a business, he was setting the stage for absolute, uncompromising market domination.
And the era following that 1978 IPO represents a period of dominance so absolute that it fundamentally altered the landscape of global commerce. Toys R Us didn't just participate in the toy market, they engineered a completely new retail classification.
They systematically annihilated traditional competition. They were the original category killer.
That term, category killer, was essentially coined by retail analysts specifically to describe the mechanics of Toys R Us.
Yes. A category killer is a highly specialized retailer that focuses entirely on one specific product category. By dedicating massive square footage exclusively to that single category, they offer such an overwhelming selection at deeply discounted prices that it makes it mathematically impossible for general merchandisers to compete.
The physical mechanics of this dominance were staggering. We were talking about individual stores carrying up to 18,000 unique items or SKUs at any given time.
But the physical scale was merely the outer shell. To understand how they achieved this, we have to look at the operational backend, what retail historians and supply chain analysts refer to as the Lazarus factor.
The massive physical warehouse was simply the visible manifestation of a highly sophisticated logistical engine. The Lazarus factor was built on data supremacy.
Lazarus centralized the entire purchasing process. Instead of individual store managers guessing what might sell locally, buying decisions were made at a corporate level based on hard data.
To facilitate this, he implemented a highly advanced computerized inventory management system decades before such technology was the industry standard.
This mainframe system tracked daily sales data directly from the point-of-sale cash registers back to the corporate headquarters.
We have to contextualize what that means for a retailer operating in the early 1980s. That level of data integration utilizing dedicated dial-up lines or nightly batch processing to transmit registered data to a central mainframe was practically science fiction for a standard retailer of that era.
It provided them with an analytical advantage that bordered on clairvoyance. It allowed the central buying office to spot consumer trends instantly.
For example, if a specific new action figure began selling out rapidly in the Midwest on a Tuesday afternoon, the central mainframe processed that data overnight.
Headquarters knew by Wednesday morning. They could immediately adjust their purchasing orders from the manufacturer and reroute supply chain logistics to capitalize on the spike in demand.
This data supremacy, combined with the sheer unprecedented volume of their orders, gave Toys R Us unbelievable leverage over their suppliers. They did not just negotiate for discounts, they dictated the terms of the market.
The volume they purchased was so vast that toy makers began altering their fundamental manufacturing operations simply to appease the demands of Toys R Us.
The FTC documents from this era provide incredible examples of this leverage. Manufacturers literally redesigned the physical dimensions of their packaging specifically to fit the exact millimeter specifications of Toys R Us warehouse shelves.
If a box was too wide for a standard Toys R Us end cap, the manufacturer changed the box, because failing to get placement in Toys R Us meant the product would fail entirely.
The financial heights they achieved utilizing this centralized data model are meticulously documented, and the growth metrics are astounding. Corporate revenues surged 185% between 1980 and 1985.
The company crossed the crucial $1 billion revenue mark in 1983, actually hitting $1.3 billion. They reached $2 billion in annual sales just 2 years later in 1985.
And by 1990, annual sales had climbed to an incredible $4.8 billion. Their market share trajectory mirrors that exact financial ascent. By 1990, Toys R Us commanded a staggering 25% of the $13 billion U.S. retail toy market.
1 out of every $4 spent on toys in America was processed through a Toys R Us cash register.
To truly understand the execution gap between Toys R Us and its imitators during this peak, we have to analyze the specific sales per square foot metrics. This is the ultimate barometer of retail efficiency.
In 1988, Toys R Us generated $330.80 annually for every single square foot of retail space they operated.
Their closest rivals in the large format toy space were being systematically crushed. Child World was only generating $221.70 per square foot, and Lionel was failing at $193.10.
An average Toys R Us store was pulling in $8.4 million a year, which is nearly double the average revenue of its closest large-format competitors.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the socioeconomic impact of that efficiency is profound. Toys R Us was so dominant that manufacturers legitimately feared crossing their buyers.
By utilizing their massive supply chain leverage to secure deep discounts and passing those discounts on to the consumer year-round, Lazarus essentially democratized toy consumption.
He took items that were once considered expensive, seasonal luxury purchases curated by department stores, and reduced them to the status of affordable, everyday commodity goods.
The dynamic was simple. If Toys R Us refused to allocate shelf space to a specific toy, that toy effectively did not exist in the broader consumer market.
But history shows that the very structural model that made Toys R Us an invincible juggernaut in the 1980s, the massive, dedicated, pure-play toy warehouse, became its fatal, uncorrectable flaw in the late 1990s.
The landscape shifted, and a new breed of apex predators entered the retail ecosystem, the big-box discount hypermarkets, namely Walmart and Target.
This shift exposes a critical vulnerability in the core architecture of the category killer model. The financial analyses point directly to the devastating effectiveness of a pricing strategy known as the loss leader.
We need to break down the exact structural economic disadvantage that Toys R Us faced when confronted with this tactic. A hypermarket like Walmart operates on a fundamentally different economic paradigm than a category killer.
Because Walmart sells everything. They sell groceries, automotive supplies, clothing, hardware, and electronics.
Right. The logistical and pricing strategy is built on basket size and aggregate margin. Walmart's analysts realize that toys are a uniquely powerful traffic driver, particularly during the highly concentrated fourth quarter holiday season. Parents are socially and culturally obligated to buy toys.
Therefore, Walmart could strategically utilize toys as a loss leader, meaning they deliberately sell the product at a loss to generate foot traffic.
Correct. Walmart could identify the top 20 hottest toys of a given holiday season and slash the retail prices of those specific items to at or even slightly below their own wholesale cost.
They were entirely willing to take a calculated financial loss on a highly desirable action figure or board game.
They absorbed that loss because their data proved that once the parent was physically inside the Walmart store to purchase the discounted toy, that parent would inevitably fill the rest of their cart with high-margin items.
A week's worth of groceries? A new winter coat? Household cleaning supplies? Or high-margin batteries for the toy itself?
The aggregate profit margin of the entire shopping cart remained highly positive, even if the toy itself generated a negative margin.
And Toys R Us, because they only sell toys, possesses no secondary mechanism to recoup that lost margin.
Exactly. Toys R Us, as a pure-play category killer, was structurally paralyzed by this tactic. They could not engage in a price war against a loss leader strategy.
If Toys R Us slashed the price of a blockbuster toy to zero margin to match...
They would simply be destroying their own profitability on their core product. It is an unwinnable mathematical equation. They were structurally incapable of matching the hypermarket's pricing strategy without committing rapid financial suicide.
We see this shift in market power clearly documented in the data. The pivotal historical inflection point is 1998. That is the year Walmart officially surpassed Toys R Us to become the top toy retailer in the United States.
And the underlying operational metrics from that period show the internal decay of the Toys R Us machine. Let's examine the inventory turnover data because it illustrates the logistical failure.
By 1999, Toys R Us's annual inventory turnover had dropped to a sluggish 2.6. That means they were only selling through and entirely replacing their inventory 2.6 times a year.
In stark contrast, Walmart's highly efficient supply chain was operating with an inventory turnover of 5.5.
That metric is devastating in the retail sector. Walmart was moving product more than twice as fast as Toys R Us. It's as if a fortress built to withstand a frontal assault was slowly starved out by an enemy that controlled all the surrounding supply lines.
We have to analyze the mechanics of why that happens. Walmart had perfected a logistical system called cross-docking.
Instead of holding vast amounts of inventory in stagnant warehouses, incoming trucks from manufacturers would arrive at a distribution center. The pallets would be immediately broken down, sorted, and loaded directly onto outbound trucks headed for individual retail stores.
Often within 24 hours. The inventory rarely sat still.
It's a circulatory system rather than a storage system.
Precisely. Because Walmart was moving product twice as fast, they required less physical warehouse space per unit. They had significantly less capital tied up in stagnant, depreciating goods, and it allowed for much higher overall corporate profitability, even when operating with lower individual item margins.
They were simply a more efficient machine. Walmart didn't defeat Toys R Us by building a superior, more engaging toy store. They bypassed the category killer model entirely by fundamentally altering the economic rules of engagement.
And the internal documents revealed that while this massive structural shift was occurring, the executive leadership inside Toys R Us was suffering from severe strategic myopia.
Charles Lazarus had stepped down as CEO in 1994, handing the reins to Michael Goldstein and later to executives like Robert Nakasone and John Eiler.
The analyses of these subsequent leadership regimes indicate they suffered from a phenomenon widely recognized in corporate strategy as institutional hubris.
They had dominated the market for so long using a specific formula that they lost the institutional capacity to recognize when that formula had become obsolete. The theory of the innovator's dilemma is highly applicable here.
The fundamental mechanism of the innovator's dilemma is that a highly successful company becomes so focused on optimizing its current profitable business model that it completely ignores disruptive changes in the market until it is too late.
The executive team at Toys R Us clung to the historical 1980s belief that simply building a massive warehouse and stocking the widest selection of physical toys would automatically guarantee consumer loyalty.
In doing so, they ignored massive underlying demographic and cultural shifts that were eroding their core market. For instance, the detailed demographic data from the NPD group outlines a highly destructive trend referred to as age compression.
Age compression is a critical sociodemographic shift. The term refers to the acceleration of the timeline in which children age out of traditional play categories.
Historically, a child might play with action figures or dolls until the age of 10 or 11. But as technology proliferated, that timeline compressed.
By the age of 7 or 8, children were abandoning traditional toys and demanding more sophisticated electronic products, cell phones, MP3 players, and primarily advanced video game consoles.
The NPD data tracks this shift with ruthless clarity. Looking at the industry data from 2004 to 2005, sales of total traditional toys dropped by 3.8% to $21.29 billion.
Within that aggregate number, specific core categories plummeted. Plush toys dropped by 15%, and traditional games and puzzles dropped by 9%.
Meanwhile, in that same exact time frame, total sales of video games grew by a massive 6% to reach $10.5 billion.
The operational problem for Toys R Us was twofold. First, they were incredibly slow to reallocate floor space to adapt to this massive consumer shift toward electronics.
Second, the fundamental economics of selling video games are highly unfavorable compared to traditional toys. The profit margins on video game consoles are notoriously thin, often in the single digits.
Because manufacturers like Sony and Microsoft use the consoles as loss leaders to sell highly profitable software.
Furthermore, in the electronics category, Toys R Us was no longer competing against mom-and-pop toy stores. They were facing fierce, entrenched competition from dedicated electronics giants like Best Buy and Circuit City,
who possessed superior supply chains and specialized sales staffs for those specific items. Beyond the failure to adapt to product shifts, the internal corporate culture had become entirely disconnected from the reality of the modern consumer.
The sources include a striking observation from a former executive, Warren Kornblum. He noted a fundamental structural flaw in their decision-making process.
The target demographic of Toys R Us was overwhelmingly mothers shopping for their children. Yet the executive committee making the vast majority of the strategic merchandising, store design, and operational decisions was, as he described it, a room of guys with ties.
This demographic disconnect resulted in a failure to implement the modern services and amenities that late 1990s and early 2000s parents desperately required.
They were operating with a 1980s brutalist warehouse mindset in an era where consumers were increasingly demanding convenience, streamlined checkout processes, and improved in-store experiences.
They failed to recognize that the sheer volume of product, which was intoxicating in 1957, had become an overwhelming, exhausting chore for a time-starved parent in 1999.
Bleeding market share in the physical realm to big box stores like Walmart and Target, the executive team attempted to execute a pivot to the digital realm.
This transition into e-commerce resulted in what the analytical sources indicate is one of the most disastrous strategic missteps in modern corporate retail history. We are talking about an absolute digital surrender.
The transition to e-commerce is where the structural inflexibility of the legacy Toys R Us operation truly manifested into a fatal self-inflicted wound.
The supply chain that Charles Lazarus built was a masterpiece for moving massive pallets of goods to large physical locations, but it was fundamentally incompatible with the realities of the internet.
The timeline of this failure begins with the devastating 1999 holiday logistics disaster. Recognizing the rise of the internet, Toys R Us had launched their own standalone e-commerce portal, toysrus.com.
However, during the crucial high-volume Christmas season of 1999, the back-end logistics of that website completely collapsed under the pressure.
The front-end user interface successfully accepted millions of dollars in orders, but the physical supply chain infrastructure simply could not fulfill them. They failed to pick, pack, and deliver thousands of gifts in time for Christmas morning.
The mechanics of that failure are deeply rooted in supply chain architecture. E-commerce fulfillment is not simply a matter of putting a stamp on a box. It requires a logistical framework capable of high-volume, small-quantity piece movement.
The industry term is pick and pack.
Right. Shipping a uniform pallet containing 500 identical Barbie dolls from a central manufacturer to a massive Toys R Us retail warehouse in Ohio is a highly streamlined bulk operation.
But e-commerce requires a worker in a warehouse to receive a digital order, walk to a specific bin, pick up one single Barbie doll, walk to another bin, pick up one single irregularly shaped, bulky tricycle.
Pack them securely into a customized cardboard box, generate an individual shipping label, and hand it off to a parcel carrier for residential delivery.
And Toys R Us possessed zero institutional knowledge of this highly granular process. Their legacy systems were designed for pallets, not individual parcels.
The resulting failure to deliver those Christmas gifts was an absolute public relations nightmare. To compensate for the ruined holidays, the company was forced to issue $100 gift certificates to thousands of furious parents,
Incurring massive financial losses and catastrophic brand damage. The executive team panicked. They realized they lacked the internal technological and logistical expertise to build a functional e-commerce infrastructure in-house, and they believed they lacked the time to learn it.
In their panic, they sought a shortcut. They sought an external savior to handle the complexities of the digital frontier. On August 9, 2000, Toys R Us signed a 10-year strategic alliance with a rapidly growing, highly aggressive online company called Amazon.com.
The terms of this specific deal are staggering when viewed with the benefit of hindsight. Toys R Us agreed to pay Amazon a massive fixed fee of $50 million a year, plus a significant percentage of all top-line sales generated through the platform.
In exchange, Toys R Us was granted the exclusive right to be the sole seller of toys and baby products on Amazon's platform.
The division of labor was strictly defined. Toys R Us was solely responsible for utilizing its massive purchasing power to acquire and manage the physical inventory.
While Amazon handled all the technological heavy lifting, Amazon managed the website development, the digital user interface, the complex order fulfillment logistics, and the customer service operations.
At the time the ink dried on that contract, the Toys R Us management team genuinely viewed this as a masterstroke of corporate synergy.
They believed they were intelligently leveraging Amazon's cutting-edge technological infrastructure while maintaining their own historical dominance in product merchandising and vendor relations.
They believed they had solved the e-commerce problem without having to invest the capital to build the infrastructure themselves.
But analyzing the long-term strategic implications of this deal reveals a fatal error in judgment.
Here's where it gets really interesting. By executing this contract, didn't Toys R Us essentially outsource their own central nervous system to a company that was structurally designed to be a direct apex competitor.
It was a catastrophic, near-suicidal forfeiture of corporate intelligence. We have to analyze what actually occurred on an operational level over the next several years.
If a customer is sitting at their home computer typed the specific URL toysrus.com into their web browser, they were seamlessly and automatically redirected to Amazon's proprietary servers.
Amazon completely controlled the digital environment. As a result, Amazon captured all the vital customer data. Amazon tracked the search queries, they analyzed the conversion rates, and they managed the user interface design.
And crucially, they learned the physical logistics. Amazon was primarily a bookseller at that time. Books are uniform, rectangular objects. They are incredibly easy to stack, store, and ship.
Shipping toys is a logistical nightmare.
Exactly. Amazon utilized this contract to learn the exact logistical requirements for storing, packing, and shipping highly irregular, bulky, multi-part items like plastic playsets, oversized stuffed animals, and complex baby gear.
Toys R Us essentially paid Amazon $50 million a year to teach Amazon how to conquer the most logistically complex categories in retail.
Amazon learned everything there was to know about the consumer psychology and back-end logistics of the toy business directly from the undisputed master of the toy business, while Toys R Us learned absolutely nothing about the architecture of e-commerce.
Precisely. By outsourcing the entire operation, Toys R Us forfeited a critical, irreplaceable decade of digital infrastructure development.
During the foundational years of the internet economy, they did not build their own proprietary servers. They did not train their own internal customer service representatives to handle digital complaints and returns.
And most devastatingly, they did not construct a single modern fulfillment center optimized for the highly complex pick-and-pack direct-to-consumer shipping model. They remained frozen in a 1980s supply chain architecture while the rest of the retail world modernized.
And the alliance inevitably fractured. Amazon, rapidly recognizing the immense profitability and high consumer demand of the toy and baby sectors, eventually violated the core terms of the exclusivity agreement.
Recognizing that they now possessed the logistical capacity to handle these items, Amazon began allowing other independent merchants, including direct, aggressive competitors of Toys R Us, to sell toys directly on the Amazon platform.
Toys R Us sued Amazon for a blatant breach of contract. The litigation was protracted, but Toys R Us eventually won the lawsuit in court, which allowed them to officially terminate the 10-year deal prematurely.
The court awarded them a financial settlement, but that legal victory was entirely hollow in the context of the broader strategic war.
By the time they successfully severed the Amazon contract and attempted to finally launch their own independent in-house e-commerce platform, it was drastically too late. They had lost years of critical momentum.
Their newly launched independent site was plagued with technical errors and logistical bottlenecks because they had zero institutional experience in running it.
More importantly, an entire generation of consumers had already been trained by the Toys R Us redirect to view Amazon as the primary default destination for all online toy purchases. The psychological conditioning of the consumer base was complete, and the operational damage was irreversible.
Weakened by the constant grinding margin pressure from Walmart and Target in the physical realm, and hopelessly handicapped online by their disastrous surrender to Amazon, the once invincible giant was incredibly vulnerable.
Their stock price stagnated as Wall Street recognized this structural decay. And this vulnerability, this exact moment of weakness made Toys R Us ripe for a financial maneuver that would fatally and permanently compromise its balance sheet.
This brings us to the autopsy of the fatal blow, the 2005 leveraged buyout.
The leveraged buyout, or LBO, is the specific financial mechanism that transitioned Toys R Us from a struggling but solvent retailer into a terminal patient incapable of recovery.
To understand why this maneuver was so lethal, we must meticulously break down the mathematics and structural architecture of an LBO.
In March 2005, a consortium of highly aggressive private equity firms, specifically KKR and Company, Bain Capital, and Fornado Realty Trust, acquired Toys R Us in a massive $6.6 billion transaction.
The company was officially taken private, meaning its shares were no longer traded on the public stock market.
But the critical, fatal detail here is not the purchase price. It is the specific methodology used to fund that $6.6 billion. The private equity consortium did not simply wire $6.6 billion of their own capital to execute the purchase.
According to the financial disclosures, more than $5.3 billion of that $6.6 billion purchase price was paid using borrowed money. It was debt.
And in the architecture of an LBO, that massive $5.3 billion debt burden is not held by the private equity firms. It is placed directly onto the balance sheet of the acquired company. Toys R Us was forced to carry the debt utilized to purchase itself.
To conceptualize the sheer audacity of this financial structure, imagine a scenario involving residential real estate. Imagine a stranger deciding to purchase your home.
Okay.
However, instead of using their own money, they force you to take out a massive mortgage on your own house. They use the cash from that mortgage to buy the house from you, they take the deed, and then they legally mandate that you must pay the monthly mortgage bill out of your own salary for the rest of your life.
That is the defining characteristic of a leveraged buyout. The target company's own assets, its real estate, its inventory, its brand equity, are utilized as the collateral to secure the massive loans required to execute the buyout.
The private equity sponsors contribute a tiny fraction of the total equity, minimizing their own risk, but the acquired company is saddled with the entire mortgage.
We need to deconstruct the specific anatomy of this $5.3 billion debt load by analyzing the corporate financial filings from July 2005, filed immediately following the completion of the merger transaction.
The capitalization structure they constructed is terrifying in its complexity and its cost. The private equity firms layered multiple highly expensive credit facilities onto the company.
For example, the documents detail a $1.0 billion European bridge facility. This specific loan matured in just one single year, coming due on July 21, 2006, and it carried a floating annual interest rate set at LIBOR plus 1.50%.
We must pause to define the mechanisms here. A bridge facility is inherently a short-term, highly volatile financial instrument. It is designed merely to provide immediate liquidity to close a transaction, with the strict expectation that it must be rapidly refinanced with long-term debt.
Relying on bridge facilities introduces massive vulnerability because the company is entirely at the mercy of the prevailing credit markets when that one-year term expires.
If the credit markets freeze, the company defaults instantly. Furthermore, the interest rate was not fixed. It was pegged to LIBOR, the London Interbank Offered Rate, which is a benchmark interest rate at which major global banks lend to one another.
By structuring the debt as LIBOR plus a premium, Toys R Us was subjected to fluctuating interest rates.
If global macroeconomic conditions caused LIBOR to rise, the interest payments demanded from Toys R Us automatically skyrocketed, entirely independent of the company's actual retail performance.
But the European facility was only a fraction of the burden. The filings detail a far more punishing component, a massive $1.9 billion unsecured bridge facility.
This massive loan was also structured with a highly precarious one-year term, but because it was unsecured, meaning it was not backed by specific hard assets, the lenders demanded a vastly higher yield.
It carried a punishing annual interest rate of LIBOR plus 5.25%.
We must analyze the sheer, crushing weight of this financial burden on a daily operational level. Based on the historical LIBOR rates prevalent during that era, the aggregate interest expense on this newly accumulated debt was astronomical.
Over the course of the next decade following the 2005 buyout, Toys R Us was legally obligated to pay Wall Street banks between $400 million and $517 million every single year simply to service the interest on this debt.
It is crucial to emphasize that point, that $500 million a year was just paying the interest. It was not reducing the principal balance of the $5.3 billion loan.
It is the financial equivalent of treading water with an anvil chained to your chest.
To place that number into the proper analytical context, that annual interest burden consumed between 3.63% and 5% of the company's total top-line net sales every single year.
In the retail sector, where profit margins are historically razor-thin and highly volume-dependent, permanently sacrificing 5% of your total gross revenue merely to service debt is a mathematical death sentence.
It strips the company of all operational elasticity.
The consequence of this massive cash drain was not confined to a spreadsheet. It became immediately and starkly visible on the physical store floor.
If a retail corporation is forced to wire $400 million a year to Wall Street banks just to avoid default, that corporation is explicitly not spending that $400 million on vital capital expenditures.
They are mathematically prevented from reinvesting in their own physical footprint.
The physical decay of the stores was a direct, undeniable symptom of the debt service. While unburdened competitors were aggressively investing in their infrastructure, Target was rolling out bright, wide-aisled, highly designed store layouts, and Walmart was continuously optimizing its hyper-efficient supply chain. Toys R Us was financially paralyzed.
They could not afford to execute necessary modernizations. Prior to the LBO, the company had experimented with a desperately needed store redesign dubbed Concept 2000, which featured lowered shelving, improved lighting, and interactive play areas.
The private equity consortium completely halted those capital-intensive overhauls because every available dollar of free cash flow was siphoned out of the operating budget to feed the debt.
As a result, the physical stores reverted to their brutalist 1980s origins. They became poorly merchandised, severely understaffed, aging, dirty warehouses with flickering fluorescent lights and scuffed tile floors.
The physical deterioration of the stores alienated the modern consumer at the exact historical moment when that consumer had more alternative, highly convenient purchasing options than ever before.
Saddled with billions in parasitic debt and trapped in outdated, decaying physical structures, the company entered its final, unrecoverable death spiral.
They had lost the convenience war to Amazon, they had lost the physical experience war to Target, and crucially, they could no longer compete on the single metric that mattered most to the modern consumer price.
We are now examining the final bleed out.
The fundamental mathematical equation of retail had turned violently against them. To generate the massive amounts of cash required to service the unyielding LBO debt, Toys R Us absolutely required higher profit margins on the physical toys they sold.
They were structurally precluded from matching the aggressive loss leader pricing of Walmart, and they lacked the massive scale and diverse product mix required to survive on the razor-thin margins accepted by Amazon.
Therefore, to extract the necessary cash from a declining customer base, Toys R Us was forced to artificially inflate the retail prices of their core inventory.
We have the specific, devastating pricing data to prove exactly how uncompetitive the corporation became in its final days.
The Boomerang Commerce Data Study, captured during mid-December, the absolute peak of the crucial holiday shopping season just prior to the final collapse, paints a grim, numerical picture of a company entirely disconnected from market realities.
The study analyzed the pricing of 60 top-selling, highly desirable toys across all major retail platforms. The results are a definitive autopsy report. On those 60 specific top items, the Toys R Us platform was priced a staggering 73% higher than Amazon.
And 78% higher than Walmart.
Yeah.
It is vital to recognize that this was not a matter of a few pennies or a minor percentage difference. The price disparity was massive and immediately obvious to any consumer engaging in basic comparison shopping.
The Boomerang study cites highly specific examples that illustrate the absurdity of the pricing matrix. Consider a standard Fisher Price Kick and Play Piano Gym, a highly popular item for infants.
During this critical holiday period, this exact item sold for approximately $25 at Amazon, Target, and Walmart.
At Toys R Us, the exact same SKU was priced at $50. That is a 100% markup over the identical item available at the retailer directly across the street.
Another example cited in the data, a Marvel Spider-Man Mega City playset. The prevailing market price at rival retailers was $65. At Toys R Us, the item was priced at $100.
Furthermore, the operational friction of shopping at Toys R Us compounded the pricing insult. The Boomerang data reveals that Toys R Us suffered from a 7% out-of-stock rate on these highly promoted key items,
compared to a highly efficient 3% out-of-stock rate for Target and Amazon. Therefore, the data proves they were significantly more expensive, forced you to navigate a degraded physical store, and were twice as likely to entirely fail to possess the inventory you were seeking.
Analyzing this data raises a profound question regarding corporate psychology. How did the executive management team, armed with this identical pricing data, genuinely believe they could possibly survive operating with this pricing matrix?
This raises an important question, and the legal transcripts from the bankruptcy hearings reveal they were relying on a ghost. They were relying on a severely outdated concept of consumer nostalgia.
The internal strategic assumption, explicitly stated by their own legal counsel, was that Toys R Us remained the only true, dedicated toy showroom in the world.
The executives genuinely believed that the highly specific, nostalgic customer experience of walking a child down dedicated floor-to-ceiling toy aisles would convince modern parents to willingly pay a massive premium.
They believed the residual brand equity of Jeffrey the Giraffe and the emotional memory of being a Toys R Us kid would somehow override the basic, rational economic calculations of the modern consumer.
The data definitively proves they were fatally wrong.
The modern consumer, equipped with a smartphone that allowed them to instantly check Amazon's price while standing directly in a Toys R Us aisle, possessed zero tolerance for a $35 markup on a Spider-Man playset, simply for the privilege of standing in a deteriorating building.
The end, when it finally materialized, arrived with brutal swiftness. The company officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in September 2017.
Initially, The legal filings pitched this maneuver to the public and the markets as a standard balance sheet restructuring a legal mechanism to shed a portion of the crushing debt, renegotiate leases, and emerge as a leaner, reorganized entity.
However, the mechanics of retail rely entirely on vendor confidence, and that confidence had evaporated. The critical holiday season of 2017 proved disastrous.
The vendor base, the global manufacturers like Hasbro and Mattel, became terrified that Toys R Us would default and fail to pay for shipped goods.
This panic led to severe, catastrophic supply chain disruptions as vendors halted shipments. Compounding the lack of inventory, the artificially inflated prices drove the remaining consumers away.
The critical fourth quarter cash flow completely dried up, rendering the reorganization plan mathematically impossible. By March 2018, the corporate entity exhausted its final lifelines.
Unable to find any viable path forward through the crushing weight of the remaining $5 billion debt and the dismal, highly publicized holiday sales failure, the company officially announced the total unmitigated liquidation of all 735 remaining U.S. retail locations.
The massive fortresses that Charles Lazarus built were systematically dismantled and sold for scrap.
It stands as the ultimate, inevitable consequence of complex financial engineering operating entirely untethered from fundamental operational reality.
Let us solemnly recap the historical trajectory we have examined today. Charles Lazarus engineered an empire that masterfully capitalized on the post-war demographic boom.
He pioneered the category killer model, building an unparalleled, highly sophisticated logistical machine that brought massive abundance and deep discount pricing to the global masses.
He dictated the precise terms of the global toy industry for decades, but profound structural inflexibility in the face of the big-box hypermarket loss leader strategy, a catastrophic near-total failure to internally adapt to the logistical demands of e-commerce, and a deeply parasitic leveraged buyout systematically stripped the corporation of the vital operational capital it desperately required to survive the transition into the 21st century.
The overarching irony of this corporate autopsy is profound. The massive entity that systematically eradicated the small, independent mom-and-pop toy stores through the ruthless application of superior scale and aggressive pricing was, in turn, systematically eradicated by new entities that achieved even greater logistical scale and deployed even more aggressive pricing strategies.
I want to leave you, the listener, with the final chilling concept to mull over as we conclude this investigation. Toys R Us died because its functional utility was entirely replaced by the highly efficient, algorithmic everything stores of the internet and the massive big box discount centers.
We now procure toys based on highly targeted digital advertisements, algorithmic recommendations, and specific search bar queries. We type in what we want, and a box arrives.
But as the dedicated physical showroom disappears entirely from the global retail ecosystem, a profound question remains. Where will the next generation of children actually go to discover the magic of a toy they didn't already know they wanted? Are we systematically and perhaps permanently trading the physical, chaotic, tactile joy of discovery for the cold, sterile efficiency of digital convenience?
It is a systemic question that extends far beyond the mathematics of retail logistics and pierces the cultural fabric of how a society experiences play.
Thank you for joining us on this rigorous, somber deep dive into the ruins of retail history. The massive aisles may be empty, and the forensic data analyzing this corporate death clearly reveals a highly complex web of fatal, self-inflicted afflictions. But the cultural absence left behind by this collapse remains starkly visible across the American landscape. Until next time, this is Speak to Dust.